Hey everyone, this is Eddie and welcome to this review of question number 5 of the California bar exam that was administered in July of 2017. Let's go to question number 1. It says, what claims may Harry reasonably raise against Doug? What defenses may Doug reasonably assert? And what is the likely outcome? Discuss. Let's go into negligence. So is there a duty under Andrews? Yes, that covers all. And the standard of care, a driver acting as a reasonable, prudent person under the circumstances. And was there a breach? And I think texting while driving may show a lack of prudence. So those elements are met. And let's talk about causation. So we have actual causation. But I think you can meet that. I think the majority of the points are going to come from proximate causation. And that's going to be very important too, because we can also insert some of the defenses, as you will see. So we must determine whether it was foreseeable that the acts of Doug caused the harm. And also we're going to see if there was an intervening act, because that's what Doug wants to show. And if there was an intervening act, it must be determined whether that event was unforeseeable. And that's going to be important, because if the intervening act was unforeseeable, it may be classified as a superseding act, and that may break the chain of causation. That would release Doug from liability, and that's what Doug wants. So let's look at the facts here. So Doug begins to text, and of course he is driving, and then he loses control of his car, and the car goes from a busy road to slipping off the road, and then it hits the electric company's utility pole, and the utility pole crashes to the ground. So I think that up to that point everything's foreseeable. Now it must be determined whether there is an intervening act. And Doug is gonna say, hey look, there's a newspaper that caught on fire and then it blew in the wind, and that's gonna be an intervening act. And he is probably going to be correct. However, that does not end the discussion, because it must still be determined whether those events were unforeseeable. And if they were unforeseeable, again, that's gonna release Doug from liability. Let us look at some of the facts here. And we're gonna go through these facts individually. So after the utility pole crashed to the ground, the falling wire sent sparks flying everywhere. I think that is pretty foreseeable. Now, the spark landed on a newspaper and caught on fire. So that may or may not be foreseeable. And then after, the burning paper blew down the street. So again, you have to argue whether that's foreseeable or not. And the burning paper landed on the roof of Harry's house. So you have a lot of facts there to analyze. So the conclusion, as long as you analyze the facts, it can go either way. And that's going to determine whether you had proximate cause, and also it's going to determine whether there was a defense there, and that's going to answer the question. Now let's move on. We're looking for other claims that Harry may reasonably raise against Doug. Negligence per se, is there a statute? Yes. And let's go to the elements there. The injured party must be a member of the statute's protected class. Let's go to the analysis. It seems as if the statute was intended to protect other motorists, not homeowners. So I don't think that claim is going to help Harry. Let's move on. Question number 2. What claims may Harry reasonably raise against electric company? What defenses may electric company reasonably assert, and what is the likely outcome? Discuss. So let's talk about now strict liability, and under that we have strict products liability. Now, are the parties proper? Let's talk about first the defendant. You guys already know the rules to that. One, that is a manufacturer, distributes or sells a product, and that includes all parties in the chain of distribution. And here, the electric company is a utility company that provides electricity. And that company is in a position to adopt the WBF, which stands for Wire Blitz Fuse. So they seem to be proper defendants. Now, is there a proper plaintiff? No privity between the defendant and the injured party is required. A proper plaintiff can be a bystander that suffered harm, and that seems to meet Harry's description. Let's talk about now the defect. Let's focus on design defect. And this test requires that an alternative design be in existence. And then it must also be determined whether the alternative design can be implemented to reduce the risk without, that's going to be key, without adding excessive cost to the product. Now, can the alternative design be implemented to reduce the risk? And you can argue, yes, you can make a strong argument for that. Let's see. You can say that it was a technological advance. Sounds very fancy, right? And you can also say that if the electric wires were down, the wires would not spark it. And that's huge right there. And also the studies showed that utility companies that use WBF vastly increase safety and reliability. However, and you also have to consider the other facts. This is the balancing act here. However, the WBF system had yet to gain widespread acceptance in the industry. So you did have to analyze those factors. Now, does the cost make it unduly expensive? And there you could say maybe, because the electric company was under the belief that the adoption of the WBF system would require a significant increase in electric rates. So there you could go either way, and as long as you analyze it thoroughly, you did great here. Now let's move on to other claims that Harry may reasonably raise against the electric company. And we have ultra hazardous activity. And here we have 4 elements. The first 2 can be easily met. We'll go through these. Inherently dangerous. We're talking about electricity here. It cannot be made safe without due care. Again, easily met. And for the next 2 elements, he can make a strong argument in either direction. Uncommon in the community, and the last element, whose risk outweighs its social utility. And of course, you still must meet causation and damages, just as we did earlier with negligence. Let's go into the analysis. So uncommon in the community. Electricity is extremely common in the community, so you have to consider that in your analysis. Now let's talk about the 4th element. Does the risk outweigh its social utility? So we're talking about risk versus utility. And what does that even mean? Here's what it means. To find liability against the electric company, it must be shown that the utility of the electric company's activity must be lower than the risk of harm. In other words, to escape liability, the utility must be greater than the risk. Let's go into social utility. Again, electricity is very high as far as utility is concerned. Let's talk about the risk, because I think that's where the bulk of the facts lead to. So in this case, for Doug to access the electricity post, first he had to lose control and then slip off the road to hit the electric company's utility pole. And that's because the electricity pole seemed to be located at an isolated part of the community. And this is something you have to analyze. So the risk seemed to be low as compared to the social utility of the electricity pole. Again, it could go either way, but if you did say that the social utility was high, and then that's going to relieve the electric company from liability from this particular claim, which is ultra hazardous activity. Now let's go on to the next reasonable claim that Harry may raise against the electric company, and of course negligence. And by this time you may be running out of time, so you do want to discuss these issues briefly. In fact, many of these issues have already been discussed, and you move on. Now let's go on to question number 3. If Harry prevails against Doug and electric company, how should damages be apportioned? Discuss. So here we are going to assume that Harry prevailed against Doug and the electric company. So first, let's determine what kind of tortfeasors we have. It seems as if we have independent tortfeasors versus joint tortfeasors, because there are two people here or two parties who act independently and cause a single and indivisible tortious injury. Now, let's talk about the percentage of liability obligation. Do the facts tell us? The answer is no. So, because we have limited facts, we can choose one recovery theory and then we can analyze that. So, let's talk about joint and several liability. Joint and several liability allows a plaintiff to sue and recover the full amount of damages from any of the defendants. And then it becomes the responsibility of the defendants to figure out their respective proportions of liability and payment. So if you are a plaintiff, you want joint and several liability, because of course that's going to almost guarantee a payment from any of the parties. And Harry here can pursue Doug or the electric company to pay the full amount, 100% of the obligation. Either one of the tortfeasors would be able to seek contributions from the other co-defendant. Now again, that answers the question, and we could have talked about joint liability and maybe even several liability, but based on the limited facts, if you discuss joint and several liability, you were responsive. So I hope this helped. Hope you passed. Until soon.